Good morning. Welcome to First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, Delaware. To all of those of you sitting here in the sanctuary, and to those of you who are joining us on our streaming online service at home. My name is Helen Foss, and I am delighted to welcome you in my role as worship associate today. Welcome to you all, no matter the hue of your skin or the origin of your ethnicity. Welcome whomever you love and wherever you are on your spiritual journey. You are welcome here. If you are new to First Unitarian, I invite you to check out our website, firstuuwilm.org, to learn more about us and to sign up for our email newsletter. Those of you with us in the sanctuary this morning are celebrating with me the fact we have removed the ropes that dictated our social distancing strategies to combat COVID-19, and we're now able to sit near each other. We're still keeping our masks on, except for those of us here at the podium, and while we're singing, and we will be gathering in the parish hall afterwards, but still masked and no coffee or tea, but able to catch up with each other in real conversation. Hooray! Each of us worship associates has been asked to speak to this month's Soul Matters theme of awakening. And I reflected on it and thought about it and realized over the years, yes, I have experienced awakening. But I have to say, there have been multiple awakenings as I dug deeper and deeper into new understandings about the same ideas. Well, let me explain. When I was in college, I attended an interfaith, interreligious weekend retreat sponsored by the National Conference of Christians and Jews and participated on a panel. There, each of us was assigned to explain the ways in which we had experienced or encountered prejudice. I offered this experience when I was perhaps 5 years old or so. After I had said my prayers, I asked my mother what church Jesus had gone to. This was no doubt triggered by my Sunday school classes at our congregational church. When my mother responded he was Jewish, I remember saying that was the church I wanted to go to. And I remember her quickly replying, "No, you don't." Perhaps aware of the prejudice then, too early in time for her to know about the Holocaust. In any case, I never forgot. Others on that panel included an African American girl who shared some of the ways she had experienced prejudice, and a Japanese American girl who'd been interred with her family in one of the camps during World War II. I was blown away, awakened to be sure of the reality of prejudice and discrimination, and its very personal toll on very real people. It changed my life, and it sent me on a trajectory in my life's work that much later landed me for 9 years as executive director of the Delaware Region National Conference of Christians and Jews. A very fast forward now through many more experiences that were mini awakening moments. In the 1980s, a gay NCCJ colleague shared with me it was harder for him to tell his mother that he was gay than it was to tell her he was dying of AIDS. About the same time, the African-American United States Representative Barbara Jordan was telling an NCCJ meeting something to the effect that what Americans want is very simple. They want an America to be as good as its promise. Well, that stopped me in my tracks. awakened me. America had promised we were all created equal, and we were not acting on that. And on, moment after moment. And it wasn't until perhaps 3 years ago that I learned about the East St. Louis race massacre in 1917, about the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre in 1921, and the Rosewood massacre in 1923 in Central Florida, all thriving African-American communities that had been destroyed with significant loss of life, all buried history. How? Why? Then came these past 2 years, all the protests after George Floyd's death. I thought I had understood how prejudice had played out in our history. I thought I understood the idea of redlining that prevented selling of properties to certain people or the disapproval of bank loans to certain people. But I hadn't fully comprehended or appreciated the cumulative effect of generation after generation not able to build capital, much like not having access to quality schools and thus never really having opportunity. I thought I knew, but I was awakened deeper and deeper into the depth of the problem. I felt smacked with the reality of what we continued to do to our fellow citizens, our neighbors. I'm shaken now by the growing momentum of the efforts to prevent certain programs, now labeled critical race theory, in schools that might make some children uncomfortable. For years, I was deeply involved with some of you here with the Green Circle program, where we helped to build empathy in schools where children could build respect for one another, and in doing so, could create positive learning environments where all kids could learn. I fear now such efforts could be seen as a threat. How can that be? What has happened to the golden rule? But I'm determined not to lose heart, though I fear I have a new awakening that we have a very long way to go to build the kind of respect and caring world I long to see. I invite you to think about this with me. And now let us prepare our hearts and minds for worship.
Thank you, Beverly, for that wonderful music. And thank you so much as well, Helen, for your reflections. I'm the Reverend Larry Piers, minister here at First Unitarian Church of Wilmington. It's great to lay eyes on you, whether you're here in the building or online. For those among us and within our wider community that are celebrating Passover later this week, for those among us or in our wider community who are celebrating Ramadan, for those of us in this community, in this congregation or this wider community that are celebrating Holy Week, may there be a blessing there in the celebrating and in the remembering. May we all hear that universal cry for peace. Peace. Salam. Shalom. My opening words are adapted from a piece by Kate McPhee entitled Light is Returning. Around us, light is returning. It rekindles the spirit of life in the skeletons of trees. It brings forth new shoots from the soil. It wakes us from our winter slumber and invites us to see what lies beyond. This morning, as we begin our celebration of spring festivals with the reflection on Passover, may we recognize what is arising in our own spirits as we celebrate together the gifts of freedom and the ever unfolding wonders of nature.
If you have a chalice at home, I invite you to join me by lighting it as we light this one in our sanctuary. The words this morning to go with this lighting is Awakening to the Work by Reverend Suzelle Lynch. The fire of love burning deep in every human heart calls us to awaken. Awaken to the work of justice. Awaken to the work of compassion. Awaken to the work of community. For in this time of human suffering and exaltation, we are called beyond awakening into action. May the chalice flame we now light guide our hearts in service to a greater good that holds all living things in its holy embrace. Now, before we sing our first hymn, I want to acknowledge the news that we shared with you in the e-news this week of the passing of Jackie Harris, who is our director of music, Kathy Harris's mother. Jackie lived at Gokesbury with me, and I'm very saddened by her death. Our hearts are with Kathy and her brothers. And this morning we welcome Beverly Baxter, who has stepped up to play the piano, and our Richard Speck, who is going to be our song leader and lead you in our first hymn. Thanks, you both.
So before we sing the hymn, I'm going to have Beverly play through it because I don't think you are as familiar with this as maybe you should be. So we're going to hear it first, and then we'll start singing. Bring out the festal bread and sing songs of freedom. Shout with the slaves who fled and sing songs of freedom. What modern pharaoh lives in arrogance crowned? Who shall be sent to challenge folly unbounded. Bring out the festal bread and sing songs of freedom. Shout with the slaves who fled and sing songs of freedom. Chains still there are to break, their days are not finished. Metal or subtle made, they're still not diminished. Bring out the festal bread and sing songs of freedom. Shout with the slaves who fled and sing songs of freedom. Still does resentment bind each brother and sister. Still do the plagues affect us red as the river. Bring out the festal bread and sing songs of freedom. Shout with the slaves who fled and sing songs of freedom. Long be our journeying, yet justice is worth it. Dance, Sister Miriam, and help us to birth it. Bring out the festal bread and sing songs of freedom. Shout with the slaves who fled and sing songs of freedom. O people, lift your head. Lift to the mountains, bushes of flames still call us, rocks still the fountains. Bring out the festal bread, sing songs of freedom. Shout with the slaves who fled, sing songs of freedom. Hey!
Oh, thank you. Please join me in affirming our mission. First Unitarian Church is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action.
I invite us now into a time of meditation and prayer. I want to offer these verses from Rabbi Janet Ruth Fallon's poem, which I'll read as part of the meditation. I actually met Rabbi Fallon at a conference, and I'm really struck by her insightful and her humorous way of inviting us to look at ourselves. In this poem, she takes us to the edge of the Red Sea, our own Red Sea, and invites us to consider, as the title of the poem signals, what we need in order to take the plunge. She writes, before we take the first step, all of us would need a life jacket, and aqua socks against the jaggy ocean floor, and an inflatable tube, and waterproof sunblock, SPF Infinity, and wrap-around shades from LL Bean, and a hat that deflects the sun, and a Swiss Army knife with the toolbox of attachments, and Red Cross certified confidence, and a pack of space-age dehydrated food, and a camel hump of spring water, and a send-off of marathon watching cheers, and a week's notice so we could cancel the paper and eat up the perishables and arrange for the dog. But by that time, the door would have dissolved, the cleft receded, the mirage evaporated, and the trio you can't touch, conviction, fearlessness, and faith, would have melted in the desert sun and have been sucked up by the sand. And so this morning, during our shared silence, may we reflect upon all those preconditions that we may have placed on moving through and moving forward, whatever is calling us from the stream of life, to put our toes in at least, if not to take the plunge. During this silence, may we call upon conviction, fearlessness, and faith from the deeper reservoirs within our own soul and our collective soul as a community, to guide our feet, to comfort us in uncertainty, and to propel us forward at this threshold in our own life and in our common world. So let us reflect on that during this time of shared silence together. Each week we do take a time in our service to attend to whatever it is that we're holding in our own heart or our collective heart as a community. What are the things that are weighing on us? What are the things that we're holding in deep concern and care? So let's take a moment to reflect on those, and as you feel you led to do so, you may begin to name the names of those that you're holding a concern for here in this room or on the chat. And I want to begin to follow up with the announcement that Helen made about Jackie Harris, Kathy Harris's mother, and light this candle to celebrate that life and that light. So, who are you holding on your heart this morning? What concerns are you holding? For all whose names were spoken and those unspoken, may they find peace and healing this day.
Good morning, everyone. Today, I am sharing the Passover story. You are going to help tell the story by saying, "Let my people go," whenever you hear me say, "And Moses said." Let's give it a try. I say, "Moses said," and you respond,
Let my people go.
"Great job." Now, on with the story. A long time ago, there was a king of Egypt called Pharaoh. Pharaoh was scared of anyone who was different from him. He was especially scared of the Jewish people. So Pharaoh enslaved all of the Jewish people. They had to work very hard and build cities and pyramids for him. Since they were slaves, they didn't have enough food to eat or enough time to rest. Moses was one of the Jewish people, and he was heartbroken to see how badly his people were being treated and how sad and hungry and overworked they were. The Jewish people were slaves down in Egypt, and Moses worked hard making bricks for the king. And Moses said,
"Let my people go."
And Moses went down to talk to the king. And Moses said,
"Let my people go."
but the king of Egypt wouldn't listen to him. No, no, I won't set your people free. Moses warned the king of the punishment that was sure to come if his stubborn heart didn't change. And Moses said,
"Let my people go."
Moses pleaded and pleaded, let God's people go where they may worship. But the king of Egypt said, no, no. And Moses said,
"Let my people go."
well, God sent Egypt all kinds of troubles. Nasty water, frogs everywhere, gnats all over, flies galore, sores, hailstones, locusts, and darkness. But the king of Egypt was stubborn, and Moses said,
"Let my people go."
Finally, when the king of Egypt saw that he could not win, he agreed to let the Jewish people go. Moses called his people together and told them to pack their bags. It was time to leave. Hurry, he said, before Pharaoh changes his mind again. The people packed so quickly that they did not have time to let their bread dough rise. They just took their flat bread with them. As Moses and his people made their way away from Pharaoh, Pharaoh changed his mind and started after them with horses and chariots. And Moses said,
"Let my people go."
when they arrived at the Red Sea, they thought that they were trapped. But a great miracle happened. God opened up the sea for the Jewish people to pass through to safety and closed it so the soldiers could not get through. The Jewish people were free at last, and they sang songs of thanksgiving. To remember the time when the Jewish people left Egypt and became free, Jewish people get together with friends and family every year to celebrate. They have a Seder meal where they tell the story of Passover and sing songs and eat special foods such as matzah to represent the bread that didn't have time to rise, and salty water to represent the tears of the Jewish people. They celebrate freedom, and they remember that everyone should be free, and that we can all work to make sure that everyone can be free like we are.
So this story of the Exodus of the Jews from Egypt is told and retold during this upcoming Passover season, which begins on Friday this year. There's never concern about a spoiler alert because we know the plot. We've heard it again and again. We know that Moses will leave his sheep herding after his encounter with the burning bush and the presence that called him to take on his destiny to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. We know that there's going to be this obstacle of the Red Sea during their escape out of Egypt, with chariots chasing them as they stand at the bank of the Red Sea. We know that this will be the beginning of a long, winding wilderness journey where the Israelites were miraculously led and fed with manna in the desert. We know that there is this defining moment after much back and forth between Moses and God and Moses and the people, that a covenant is received on Mount Sinai, and from there a people ventures on its way to live out its promises in a new land. Through these long trails and trials, those who were formerly enslaved become a people, obeying their God rather than being subservient to a Pharaoh. It doesn't matter that we tell the same old story over and over again. In fact, in Judaism, there are often many ways to tell the story, many versions of the story to tell. As you may know, there is a written Torah, the scriptures. Sorry, this mic is kind of moving on. It's trying to lead. It's trying to have an exodus of its own. Just a moment. There's a written Torah, the scriptures, and an oral Torah, which includes, the Midrash. I think that'll work. I don't know. Here we go. How patient you are. Is that better? Is that okay? Good. Okay, so there's the written Torah, and then there's the oral Torah that includes the Midrash, which invites in the imagination and the retelling of the story in so many different ways in order to emphasize small points in the text and evoke new meanings. Passover provides many examples of the Midrash of this story. There are many Haggadot, which is the plural for Haggadah. Since Haggadah means a telling, each year, in addition to some of the classic versions of the Haggadah, there are often whole arrangements of new Haggadah that come out each year. So I looked at the article online, the best Haggadah of 2022, and here's what I discovered. You can find a feminist Haggadah, of course, a leftist Haggadah, an LGBTQ Haggadah, a Black Lives Matter Haggadah, a recovery Haggadah, a refugee-focused Haggadah, a heart-wide Haggadah, and this year, an emoji Haggadah. So those of us who were raised in particular Christian branches of Christianity may not be useful to this playful retelling of scriptural stories. Some of us, in fact, were told that the texts were true, and even when they were never meant to be historical records. Or maybe we were even pressured to believe the actual words in the book rather than experience it as a collection of stories. I don't want to give a little lesson here that sounds more like a lecture, but I want to remind those of us raised in the Christian tradition that the four Gospels, those are a midrash. Each of those are a version or a commentary on the story of Jesus, and they were only selected among hundreds of others that were present at the time. They were the ones that got canonized. I got off topic, but I'll get back to my sermon now. One misconception that often arises is, how should we hear the telling of traditional stories? Robert Alter, a professor of Hebrew and comparative literature, points out that the religious tradition has by and large encouraged us to take the Bible seriously rather than to enjoy it. He says that when we can enjoy the stories as stories, paradoxically, we can see more in the stories and find more personal truth. So I want to engage this morning in an interplay with the story as story and also the personal relevant meanings that any of us can draw from them, whatever our religious or non-religious background. In the Night of Questions, which is a Reconstruction Jewish Haggadah, the authors provide this answer to the question, is the story true? They provide a kind of disclaimer at the beginning for those who could use it. They write, in our time, most of us tell the Seder tale as a sacred story rather than historical record. We are skeptical of miracles. We are troubled by the moral implications of plague and punishment, and we seek a God commensurate with our enlarged vision of the liberation of all peoples. Is the story true? No. Not if we mean an accurate account of events that happened more or less the way they are told. But our ancestors did not write history. They wrote of their experience of a power greater than themselves that stood for freedom from oppression. We do not tell the story of the Exodus because it is historically accurate. We tell the story because it is our story. And we need to recover and uncover the eternal ideas that this story conveys. So we tell and retell these stories, such as the story of Exodus, so that we can enter into the story again and again and see what does it disclose to us in this telling at this time. We all know that we're not talking merely about history, theology, or meteorology when the Israelites are camped out on the shore of the Red Sea, trying to escape the Pharaoh and his armies chasing them. I often like to say we can never enter the same story twice. And this year, I want to tweak my usual phrase by saying we can never enter the same river twice. Since we're going to look at three major themes of the story: leaving Egypt, standing on the shore of the Red Sea, and the journey of liberation. I believe that in each of these movements of the story, there are some perspectives that can be offered to us as well. So let's reflect first on the leaving Egypt moment of the story. We have hints in the text itself that this is not merely history, but a symbolic story. When the text says that the Jews had to escape Egypt, the word Egypt, Mitzrayim, is related to the Hebrew word for narrows, metzar. So the Israelites leaving Egypt had to get through a narrow place, just as we do when we are trying to move through that place where fear and hope intersect in us. And we must move beyond whatever constraints we have. I imagine that there can be a dialogue with the story that points us to the possible truth in our own lives, that we have each our own escapes from Egypt, from those narrow, constraining places within ourselves. The contemporary Jewish teacher, Rabbi Yael Levi, writes, "It is the narrow place. It is the place of the hardened heart and the constricted perspective that walls off connection and relationships. It is a place of fear and anxiety and mistrust that makes it difficult to be compassionate, understanding, and generous." If we can imagine that all of us have our own Egypts to escape, our own constraining places to get through, all of us can attend to the constricted places in our own hearts and lives and society. Perhaps you might find some relevance in these verses by Rabbi Yael Levi. It's time, the infinite calls. Come, I will take you out. I will deliver you to a new place. I will help you to transform. I will bring you into relationship with all life, and you will know your beloved place amid the myriad of all of life. I can't, the soul cries. I am so afraid. Of course you are, the infinite responds. You have been in the narrow place for so very long, but I will lift you up. So just for a moment, you will see the expanse of possibilities, and then you will decide what is more frightening, to stay where you are or to step towards what might be. To stay where you are or to step towards what might be. Another critical moment in the story of this escape from Egypt is that crossing of the Red Sea that Catherine told us about in the story. Now, first, a footnote for those of you taking notes. The literal Hebrew translation is a sea of reeds. Some of you may know this, which in the King James was translated as the Red Sea. Some contemporary translations even say a sea of seaweed. Kind of loses something in the translation. So I hate to diminish that lingering dramatic image that some of us might have from Cecil B. DeMille's 1956 movie, The Ten Commandments. I wish I could have that soundtrack playing right now as I say this. That moment when Charlton Heston, as Moses, lifts up his hands and the waters of the Red Sea part. Let's all do that for a moment. Let's lift up our hands and let the Red Sea part. Isn't that a wonderful, dramatic moment? So somehow, it's a little less dramatic to think that it could have been a low tide on a sea of reeds and not a miraculous parting of the waters of the Red Sea that allowed the Israelites to escape. But again, we're encountering story, not history or topography or geography here. So one midrash or commentary on the story says as they stood on the shore of the Red Sea, the people rebelled at the sea and refused to cross. Just like we may have sometimes an inner battle with ourselves at those crossroad times of our own life. Part of us says yes, part of us says no. Now, tradition has it that someone named Nashon simply leapt into the waves of the sea. He took steps beyond his fear, beyond uncertainty. Even filled with his fear and his uncertainty, he waded in feet first. As the story goes, it wasn't until Nashon took that very first step that the seas actually parted. I appreciate another poem by the contemporary Jewish poet Rabbi Janet Ruth Fallon that I read during the meditation. This poem is entitled, "Someone Had to Be the First One." She writes, "Someone had to be the first one to test the waters, even if you can't swim and can't imagine floating, to dip a big toe in the ocean. Even if the opposite shore is invisible or far beyond imagination, to extend yourself. Even if the sea is icy with flies and muck, to take the first step, even without a life preserver or inflatable raft or water wings, to risk total immersion, even if everyone else says no and holds back in terror, to plunge in, trusting you'll survive the depths. Trusting. Nashon reminds us to move not just beyond our reluctance, but with our reluctance at those threshold moments. Not just beyond our fear and our uncertainty, but with our fear and uncertainty. And it's only by moving with them can we discover the waters of possibility, what lies on the other side for us. Now, don't we each have our own decisive Red Sea moments when we've had to make some vital crossings between what was and what is and what could be? You might sense your feet right now upon the ground as you recall a threshold moment that you have been through, that shore that you once stood upon, to bring to mind those threshold times in our own lives. Or maybe you're even standing on a threshold moment right now. That shore of the Red Sea may represent for us those threshold times in our own lives. How we cross those threshold times or don't cross them for whatever reason often informs what happens next in our lives. The Irish poet and writer John O'Donohue offered this perspective on the threshold. And any time you can ask yourself, at which threshold am I now standing? At this time in my life, what am I leaving? Where am I about to enter? What's preventing me from crossing my next threshold? What gift would enable me to do it? The third theme in the Passover story is the journey towards liberation. In the story of the exodus of the Jews from Egypt, we sometimes forget that the Jews had actually been in Egypt for 400 years before this opportunity for their own liberation arose. 400 years. That's a long time to get accustomed to your situation, to accommodate to it, to accept how your conditions have determined your identity. I often think about the complaining, what the Hebrew scriptures called the murmuring that the Israelites did along the journey, and how this was part of that discomfort expression of the discomforting feeling of moving from one well-established identity to another. In all their enslavement in Egypt, they knew their role. They knew when to clock in and when to clock out. When they showed up for work at the construction site of the pyramids. And we often murmur too, either out loud or just to ourselves, when we're going through a transition of circumstance or a transition in our own sense of identity, of who we are and of what we are to become. Let's practice a little murmuring now. Let me hear your best murmur. Great. Wonderful. A little louder. And just a little louder. Wonderful. So pay attention to that sound when it starts happening in you. It's an indication that something wants to shift, that something is about to change, or an invitation for a change is occurring. So getting through the Red Sea, leaving Egypt behind, was only the beginning of their actual liberation. The relentless journey through the wilderness, the extended, uncomfortable camping at Mount Sinai, all of these trials and trails were all symbolic of an ongoing inner work. Likewise, there's always inner work in us as individuals and in us as a society in order for real transformation to occur. What is being transformed is our own consciousness, our own sense of things as they are, and we're often invited into an expansive consciousness at those moments of transition, those moments of threshold, those moments of our own crossing of the Red Sea. At one level, we understand that our experience of liberation happens from moment to moment. It does not happen once and for all. It's an ongoing process and change of consciousness. So one challenge that will be emphasized during this upcoming Passover season among some Jews and the multi-faith community is how enslaved our society is, one way or another, on our dependence to fossil fuels and subsequently to a way of life that is robbing us and future generations of freedom and of life. Across the country in coming weeks, multi-faith groups will be gathering for collective actions in front of the buildings of the biggest investors in fossil fuels. They are urging us all to leave our Egypt, our Metzer Yam, our narrow, constricted ways of thinking and living in the world behind us. Rabbi Arthur Waskal of the Shalom Center in Philadelphia is helping to organize this particular action. So may this Passover be a time for all of us, whatever our religious backgrounds, whatever our perspectives, to recognize that we may be beckoned to take a journey out of our own enslavement to things as they have been and find a new way forward, a new way of thinking about many things that we've gotten so accustomed to so many things that we've taken for granted. At this edge of our own metaphorical Red Sea, at the edges of the unknown before us, we may decide to run back to the familiar, to move forward, or to stay put. But may we join and consider ways of figuring out what our own shift in personal and collective consciousness might be this Passover, from an ego consciousness to an eco consciousness. I invite you, those of you who are available, to join with the Human Rights Task Force at 12 o'clock this afternoon for the film Climate Solutions 101, which will be an opportunity to look at some of the ways in which you can engage in some of those actions. It is this afternoon, right? At noon. Is that right? I just need a little reassurance. I said the right thing. Okay, good. So when we look within and when we look around our global community, I believe a shift of consciousness is available to us and is beckoning us now more than ever. An awakening is right here now, calling us, as in these words and a familiar hymn. Wake now my vision of ministry clear. Brighten my pathway with radiance here. mingle my calling with all who will share, work toward a planet transformed by our care. We'll now sing a hymn, Vine and Fig Tree, that Richard and Beverly will help us with. Go ahead, Richard, you'll lead it.
So again, Beverly will play it through the full way so you will hear it, because again, I think you're not that familiar with this one. So when you're ready, please rise. And we'll sing it through twice, the whole thing. And everyone neath a vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And everyone neath a vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And into plowshares turn their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And into plowshares turn their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And everyone neath a vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And everyone neath a vine and fig tree shall live in peace and unafraid. And into plowshares turn their swords, nations shall learn war no more. And into plowshares turn their swords, nations shall learn war no more.
Today is the second Sunday of the month, and the Sunday dedicated to a special collection. The month of April is dedicated to the Delaware Nature Society, an organization passionately supported by numbers of First U members as volunteers and longtime supporters. I want to thank Pam Finkelman for organizing this information for you to hear and see this morning. For an organization that began 58 years ago in the outbuilding of a former hog farm, the Delaware Nature Society has come a long way, Pam says. The time was right in the 1960s to begin a movement to connect Delawareans to nature. Delaware natural spaces needed our attention. Del Nature meets environmental challenges and the threat of climate change in 2022 with science-based education, advocacy, and action. Many members of our church are supporters, since Unitarians share in their vision of a healthy and sustainable environment. Today, the Delaware Nature Society is asking for your financial support. To give you an idea of how your dollars will be used, I'm going to list just a few of the many activities going on now or in the near future at Del Nature. You can become a water warrior. Del Nature is a leader in advocacy for clean water. Healthy water is essential, and yet most of us take it for granted. Delaware Nature Society believes through regulation, legislation, and education, we can assure a good water supply for everyone. When you turn on your tap water, remember all the work being done to keep that water safe. Del Nature provides memorable outdoor experiences. You're invited to visit delnature.org website and explore upcoming programming. With spring here and summer on the way, the activities calendar is lengthy. There must be something on the list you'd like to do. Nature instructors are Del Nature Society staff and teacher naturalists, and they're excited to share outdoor experiences with you. Coverdale Farm opens this month and is a great destination for the whole family. Coverdale offers enriching experiences for all ages. You can learn farm-to-table cooking, explore the land with expert naturalists, take a private hayride, walk the farm trail, or simply enjoy a weekend visit. The market store with fresh produce is open Friday through Sunday. You can go to Costa Rica in January 2023 with a naturalist, or sign up for other educational eco-tour adventures. Upcoming trips are again listed on the Del Nature website. Do you love birds? Del Nature is involved in bird conservation through habitat restoration. Almost 200 nests, monitored each week by the staff and volunteers, are used by several species of cavity nesting birds. Meet the staff ornithologist and get all your bird questions answered. Bird banding with Ian Stewart takes place Wednesdays, April through December from 8 to 11 a.m. at the Bucktoe Preserve, except on cold, windy, or rainy mornings. Help us fight climate change. Del Nature practices regenerative agriculture at our Coverdale farm, which improves soil health and carbon sequestration. We're actively educating young people on how to connect with and protect the natural world. It's their future, of course. There are, of course, many more programs and activities, and not enough time to mention them all. I'll close with a reminder that realizing the mission is only possible because of the funding from business community, foundations, legacies, and most important, generous individuals. As we've been emphasizing during our recent church pledge campaign, what we do with our money shows what we value. And preserving our natural world is certainly a good value. Thank you on behalf of the volunteers and staff and supporters of the Delaware Nature Society. You'll find the 4 ways now to give on the side of your screen. The 4 ways to support the Delaware Nature Center on this second Sunday special offering. Those of you here in the sanctuary can put a check in the box at the back. You can mail a check to the Halstead address, write special collection on the memo line, or you can log into the church website at firstuuwilm.org/donate now, or use the Vanco mobile faith engagement app and follow the prompts. Please join me now in dedicating our offering to the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action. We dedicate our lives in these, our offerings.
Hotzianu, mi Mitzrayim, Hotzianu, mi Mitzrayim, Daenu, 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 Daenu. Had he given us the Torah, only given us the Torah, had he given us the Torah, Daenu, 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 Daenu. Natan lanu et hashabbat, daenu, 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 die, die, nu, die, die, nu, die, nu, die, nu, die, nu, die, die, nu, die, die, nu, die, die, nu, die, nu, die, nu.
Our closing words. Blessed is all that brings us from the narrows into the wilderness, sustains us with endless possibilities, enables us to reach a new place. We celebrate our own journeys through the narrow, limiting places in our own lives and toward new possibilities. Today we will join in the parish hall for social time. I look forward to meeting those of you who I haven't yet met and for that time together.
For those of you at home who have lit a chalice, I invite you to extinguish it as we extinguish our chalice here in the sanctuary. These words are "We Are One" by Amy Zucker Morgenstern. Never has it been more true than now. We extinguish this flame, but the sparks within us remain alight. From each of us, in our supposed solitude, the signals buzz and hum, sparking through space one to another. We are one. Connecting us invisibly but palpably, we are one. And from every window, our light shines.
Okay. Feel good?